Hi, welcome to episode 11 of Formula Citizen. This episode's been titled Two Defining Moments in the Championship. It's a recap of the Dutch and Italian Formula One Grand Prix. We're going to do a deep dive into Lando's DNF in Zandvoort, but just as importantly, what I'm calling the inverted driver strategy that McLaren's adopted. It's not just the 6-point swing in terms of that decision or those team orders, but more importantly, the ramifications that it's going to have throughout the rest of this season. But let's start with all the news off the track. We had the Cadillac driver announcement take place over the last few weeks in a kind of Matrix-style promotional launch video narrated by Keanu Reeves, titled When Destiny Calls. And it ends with this iconic tagline from the movie, "We've been expecting you." Powerful scripting, powerful imagery. They did a great job. So congratulations to the Cadillac brand team. I thought the timing of the announcement was perfect too. They kind of owned that complete media cycle. As I highlight in episode 10, the summer break this year was quiet. And given the significance of Cadillac's entrance into Formula One as the 11th team, and given their huge fan base in America, I'm wondering if there was a directive or some form of instruction from Liberty Media as the owners of Formula One to establish a blackout window, which is essentially a period of time of clean air to maximize media cut through. And clearly that worked. Moving forward to Zandvoort, I want to talk about qualifying. It's important to note that only 3 teams brought upgrades following the enforced 2-week summer shutdown of all the factories. So we very much expected a status quo in terms of the pecking order, but we saw a few surprises. In FP1, FP2, and FP3, those sessions were all dominated by Lando Norris. Interesting opinion from Jacques Villeneuve following the race, where he talked about the need for Lando to do a better job of disguising his true pace early on in the race weekend. I thought that was a really interesting insight. And maybe Lando likes to take this approach of laying down a benchmark with his teammate. But if you compare that with Max, he tends to hold back and he kind of dials in the car throughout the weekend and peaks at qualifying. So just a different approach, but clearly it gave Oscar a significant advantage. He was able to chip away at that quarter of a second gap over the course of the weekend. Lando again was quickest in Q1 and Q2, but when it counted the most in Q3, it was Oscar who held the edge by 0.012 thousandth of a second. Think about that. The only lap, the only set of tires all weekend where he was quicker than Lando was in Q3. What does that say? He found quarter of a second over his teammate just by keeping his head down, working hard, analyzing the data, looking at the onboards, and he found that time. Again, incredibly important, starting at the front of the grid on what is a tight track. I also want to note Isaac Hadjar, his P4 after sitting out FP2 was incredible in qualifying. This kid is something special. Liam Lawson P8, the Racing Bulls are showing some pace following the summer break. We moved to the race. Piastri was dominant. Lando's DNF really took away from what was a controlled race for Oscar. There were 3 safety car starts, wet drying conditions. He was faultless, and he moves to 9 career wins now, 1 more than Daniel Ricciardo and equal with his own manager, Mark Webber. Hadjar's podium was a highlight. I don't know what it is about Formula One podiums when they come from the underdog. We had the same thing with the Hulk at Silverstone, and again with Hadjar and Zandvoort. It was a special moment and wonderful to see that excitement on his face. Aston Martin, P7, P8, very consistent. Haas had a double points finish. Ollie Beerman starting from pit lane had a really strong drive, and Esteban Ocon picking up the final point for 10. And on the flip side, Ferrari had 2 DNFs, not the start that Lewis Hamilton wanted. He didn't need a crash after the summer break reset, but I really loved those priceless images of Charles Leclerc sunbathing in the sand dunes in Zandvoort. Fantastic. I just want to make a note. Just in the last few days, there's been some news around Carlos Sainz, who received a 10-second race penalty in Zandvoort and two penalty points for making contact with Liam Lawson in the race. After a rider review initiated by Williams, this decision was rescinded. Without doubt, the most defining moment in the race came when we heard the words, "I smell smoke." It wasn't the Mercedes engine. It's been a reported failure of a small car part in the McLaren chassis, which created an oil leak and the engine shut down. It hasn't been discussed, but I do wonder if this will hurt Lando later in the season in terms of his engine rotation. The most interesting thing for me, and I've talked about this throughout the season, I'll continue to do that, is how does that shift the psychology? That's the question we need to be asking. Does Lando become a little bit more uninhibited? Does Oscar become a little bit more conservative? Let's see how they react over the next few weeks. Again, Jacques Villeneuve made the comments after the race that Lando needs to be a killer. He needs to play games. He needs to create a 1-3 finish or a 1-4 finish. Will Oscar take less risks now? And I guess other mistakes and moments are to come throughout the rest of this season, and we'll have to wait and see how they play out. But the most important thing is that there's been a change in their mindset. There has to be when you move to 34 points ahead in the championship, and that will trigger reaction from both drivers and the team. And we'll get to that subject in a moment. Moving forward to Monza, the Temple of Speed. In qualifying, the V-Carb and Alpines were out in Q1. The Haas and the Williams were out in Q2. McLaren P2, P3, Ferrari P4, P5, Mercedes P6, P7. Max was able to extract the maximum from that Red Bull. He clearly trimmed out a lot of downforce, clocked a lap record. We'll need to wait and see if this was track specific or if the team has been able to unlock some more potential from that car, but a super impressive lap from Max and great to see him at the front of the grid again. Oscar was slightly off the pace. The only thing I can put that down to is the fact that he missed FP1 while Alex Dunn, the rookie, was in the car, and that probably compromised his weekend. I thought this was one of the most aggressive starts of the season from a lot of drivers. The turn one was clearly high risk, a little bit of jeopardy from a few drivers. Lando whined about Max's superior racecraft again, and he was obviously handed back the lead before Max passed him cleanly the second time and drove off into the sunset for a 19-second victory, the largest winning gap of the 2025 season as well. Oscar made a really brave overtake on Charles Leclerc around the outside of Lesmos to hold P3. This proved to be critical for his race. He was watching his overtake on replay in the cool-down room after the race and made a really interesting comment that the Ferraris were so fast on the straight and so slow in the corners. He clearly worked out within a few laps, and he knew what he needed to do to get past Charles Leclerc and without compromising his race, and he made a ruthless overtake to get ahead early, and that was critical to the final outcome for him. I just want to cover off the top 10 finishes from the race. Ferrari P4, P6, Mercedes P5, P9, Alex Albon having an incredible season, P7, Gabriele Bortoleto P8. Again, that battle between him and Isaac Hadjar for Rookie of the Year is heating up. Two incredible talents with long careers ahead of them in Formula One. And Hadjar also picked up a P10 in this race as well. Again, really, really consistent. Okay, Swapgate, also known as the inverted strategy, which was adopted by the McLaren team to change the order of their drivers during the Monza race. What do we think? There are so many polarizing views on this topic. I want to take my time to dissect every element in the McLaren team intervention, right? So the reference to Hungary 2024 being the same scenario, where they pitted the drivers in this order to reduce the threat from behind of an undercut. It's not the same scenario because in 2024, Lando and Oscar were not fighting for a Formula One World Championship. The order of the pit stops was decided by Lando, make no doubt about it. The threat was secondary to Lando choosing what he thought was the optimal strategy for him. And here's the transcript to prove it. Will Joseph, his engineer, said, "Lando, we will box this lap onto the soft tyre." Lando said, "Did you want to box the other car first?" His engineer replied, "Yep, we'll do that. We'll swap it around, so stay out." And then Norris said, "Well, only if he doesn't undercut me, otherwise I'll box first." And then his engineer said, "There will be no undercut." So he made a conscious decision to pit in that order because it was going to optimize his performance and his race outcome. The second point is this. The radio message referencing Hungary 2024 made me feel sick. The team effectively guilt-tripping Oscar into handing back a place. Many fans feel this is an overreach. I do. I think it was an overreach, and it flies in the face of the racing gods. And as silly as that sounds, the racing purists agree that a slow pit stop falls into the hands of the racing gods. When you start trying to correct that, you've got a problem on your hands. The question is, why are they doing this? Because at some point you can't create a level playing field anymore. What if we see a pit stop error in Abu Dhabi in the last race of the season? Are we going to rewrite that? When do the papaya rules stop? When do the papaya rules stop? When Oscar needs an intervention and the team remains silent? Or when a driver just says no or says fuck you? At some point, the balancing out thing will encroach on the championship fight, if it hasn't already. But what is the end goal? Are they just going to run this down to the final race and then let them go? In McLaren's defense, I can only assume that this decision was related to team culture. The pit stops are the culmination of two teams working together, and maybe the individual on the front left tyre gun was one of Oscar's guys. That's all we can assume. But my response is this. Each of the drivers have their own team of engineers and analysts who are ultimately responsible for extracting the maximum performance for their side of the garage. No other sport in the world has this dynamic. If you want to talk about favoritism, we should talk about the smaller details. McLaren recently built a special front suspension component for Lando to give him more feel in the front of the car. Oscar hasn't adopted this. Is that a performance advantage? Are they favouring Lando? The body language and reaction from Andreas Stella and Zach Brown when Lando pulled up in Zandvoort was obvious for the world to see. They were genuinely gutted. They weren't disappointed, they were gutted. Here's my take on the underlying motivation. The team title's done. Why are they getting involved in the driver's fight? Marketing and money. That's the reason why. This is a British team and Lando Norris is a British driver. The British Formula One market is worth tens of millions of dollars more than the Australian market. This is about money. Andrew Benson was on the Checkered Flag podcast a few days ago, and he said he'd spoken to a senior engineer from another race team who said he thought that the 25 Hungary result, where Lando one-stopped from fifth in the race on lap one to win that race, was unfair and it should never have happened. That a secondary strategy should top the optimal strategy from the team. So again, these are views of senior engineers, senior figures within other Formula One racing teams who are starting to question papaya rules and how it's playing out. I also want to share with you a little article from Fox News down here in Australia where it talks about the papaya rules timeline in 2025 and some of the key incidents that we should note. This all started in race one in Australia. Oscar was asked to hold station for a few laps when they were approaching blue flags. They were passing some back markers, and he lost the opportunity to attack Lando with a tyre advantage. In Imola, Oscar Piastri should have finished second behind Max, but was committed to the wrong strategy, and Lando Norris passed him late on after a safety car, having been put on a better strategy. Should this no adverse outcome rule have applied to that race? In Hungary, Piastri was put on the two-stop strategy, as I said, and the team didn't realise that was slower than the one-stop strategy until it was too late, and it offered Norris that strategy, and he benefited from a worse start and ended up winning that race. Should Piastri have been swapped back into the lead as a form of justice? What about the British Grand Prix, where the team said it disagreed with the penalty that dropped Piastri's way after it had a dominant lead throughout that race? And eventually Lando Norris won that race. Piastri asked whether he should be swapped back into the lead, and the team disagreed. The team chose not to act on that, and he finished second. Alternatively, given Norris's engine penalty in Zandvoort, and it was a failure basically from a part supplied by the team, should Piastri be forced to retire from the race or to balance the points? Executing any of the above examples feels contrary to what most would accept as simple racing fortune, but they're logically connected to what happened in Monza. And there's a big question that now faces McLaren, having opened this Pandora's box, and it could create the most unthinkable scenario at the season's climax. I don't normally get drawn into gossip, but there is a little bit of noise around this contract clause covering their driver status within the McLaren team and how these team orders could be considered a breach of the driver contract. What if this is true? Was Webber and his team smart enough to negotiate this into Oscar's new contract during the 2024 and 2025 off-season? I have noticed Mark Webber is attending a lot more races. He's a lot more active in the garage and obviously monitoring this team dynamic really closely. We now glimpse ahead to Baku this weekend. All we want is a clean race, no team interventions. 2024, Oscar was rapid at this track. But here's my prediction for the final 8 races of the season. I feel like it's a straight race to 10 wins. Whoever gets there first will take the title. At the moment, it's 7-5 in terms of race wins to Oscar. And I think the first driver to get to 10 race wins will be the world champion. That's the tipping point, unless Zach and Andrea keep intervening. Thanks for listening.